Welcome to Presence, a global conversation for a new earth, with hosts Doug King and Cody Deese.
Thank you, and welcome again to our podcast.
Welcome to the I totally just hijacked your intro.
You did not allow me to do the appropriate introduction, but I'm hopeful this just is an indication of how excited you are today.
Doug, we don't have time to waste. It's like go time.
Man, I like that enthusiasm.
You know what it is? We just keep running out of time on these things.
Well, you're right about that.
But it's not, and people are like, well, why do you put a time frame on it? Because we know you people, our friends, are busy.
Yes. We're trying to respect your time.
You have jobs and kids and real life.
Exactly.
And so if you're anything like me, I put in a podcast, and if it says an hour plus,
right,
that's a large commitment.
I'm out.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to put it off to sometime in the future and maybe not get there. But these are ongoing series of things. And we're thinking, okay, you're driving in the car somewhere, you can listen to it probably in, 30 minutes.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, this isn't a Netflix show. So I understand that this isn't like, you're not going to binge listen to all these, although there probably are. There may be one or two that probably do that. I don't think too highly of the podcast, but that's probably the case. I've actually done that a time or two with different podcasts.
Sure.
But
if there's a subject of interest and you're personally dealing with it or doing some research on it, that's why we catalog them.
Yep. Well, part of the problem that we keep running out of time is because of stuff like this.
Yeah, like we're rambling right now. And we started off so well. You were so enthusiastic. You jumped right in there with...
I know, both feet.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Today.
Yeah.
I want to talk about faith.
Okay.
And we'll see where this conversation takes us. But let's maybe put some structure around defining what we talk about when we talk about faith. Specifically, and then obviously go to the narrative and kind of look at the trajectory of faith.
Yeah.
And then that whole idea of we're justified by faith.
Mm-hmm.
Anything about Hebrews 11.
Yeah.
And like all these men are mentioned, and it's like the faith chapter. And then obviously,
except for one woman in there, Rahab the prostitute. She kind of messes up your heroes of faith idea when you're looking at it from a traditional church standpoint.
God, tell me more.
It messes you up because she was willing to help the spies and put herself at risk in that culture and at that time by helping the spies. And so the biblical narrative over and over again, just when we think we have this thing figured out, it throws a curveball. This is why I think the narrative has so much power when it comes to talking about faith or any other subject. I love the fact that Jesus is talking about who's your neighbor? I'll tell you who it is. It's a Samaritan that's not even part of your religion. Who has faith? I'll tell you. Let me tell you about Rahab the prostitute and what kind of faith she had. It's always this curveball that people get thrown that God is so much bigger than the confined box we attempt to put him in.
Good Lord.
It in. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is she the only female mentioned in Hebrews 11? Do we know?
I'll have to go back through because obviously, and I can't remember if there was one other mentioned in there, but obviously within the narrative itself, even in Old Testament times, you've got Ruth and others that a lot is written about. And that's, of course, a subject that we can talk about even in separate podcasts as far as the divine feminine and the voice of female and male in that. But yeah, so I just remember that one specific example. And again, it always comes from those you would not expect. Again, Jesus takes a tax collector who has this horrible reputation in the culture as a thief, a fraud, so forth, or a fisherman who obviously is uneducated. How in the world are they going to be a spokesperson? You go over and over again, and I would say this for anybody listening: don't ever ask the question, who am I to say something? Who am I to have a voice in this way or that way? It's not about us from self as source, who am I? It's about the source that moves through us and that we are of, that gives us the power. That's the only power that exists. That's kind of off the track here. But that is showing that this power is not confined to the typical categories that we do that marginalize and just write people off.
Man, that's inspirational.
Good.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about faith.
Yep.
At some point we'll talk about trust, justification by faith, certainty, doubt, all of that. But today, as far as a starting place for us, you had talked about going straight to the narrative and talking about Abraham.
Yeah.
Why do you start there when it comes to faith?
Yeah. So again, we're basing our trip through the narrative on the spiral dynamics, and we know that the very first level is archaic. That is the beginning of human instinct. So you begin where you would think, and that is with Adam. And Adam is actually the antithesis of faith, because faith points away from the self. Adam did the opposite. Adam tried to enhance the self. Adam tried to grasp. Adam tried to enhance. Adam tried to be like God. Again, I've said this many times over. If you're trying to be like something, you see it as separate, number one. Mm-hmm. Number two, if you could become like something, then you don't need that something because you're already like it. Then you have the antithesis of Adam. In the first archaic level, in the book of Genesis, the genesis of the story, you have two characters, not just Adam, but Genesis is where Abraham shows up. Mm-hmm. And so what is Abraham? He's the other thread that's going to run through this story, and that is spirit as source. You have two threads that run through the story. Self as source is introduced in the genesis of it all by Adam. Spirit as source is introduced in the genesis of it all by Abraham. Mm-hmm. And Abraham is the beginning of the story of faith, and faith is that which points away from the self to that which is the true, which is going to be called spirit through, or God, through the rest of the story. So you're beginning at the archaic level with the idea of faith because it is a thread that runs alongside of self as source.
Okay, so two threads.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you find it from the very beginning of the biblical narrative. So
yeah.
Book of Genesis,
mm-hmm.
two threads, Adam, Abraham.
Yes.
The thread of Adam is self as source.
Yeah.
The thread of Abraham is what brings us to this conversation.
Yes.
Which is faith, mm-hmm. or
God is
away
source.
from
yeah.
self,
yes.
or God is source.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little more about how faith worked for Abraham.
Yeah. So when I have looked at this in other places and talked about Abraham, possibly have mentioned this passage before, but again, we'll keep reintroducing these ideas to reinforce them. One of the things I think about, Cody, is Paul's statement in Romans chapter 1, verse 17, I believe it is, where Paul makes this statement that the righteousness of God is being revealed. That's a process. That's a trajectory. The righteousness of God is being revealed from faith to faith. That to me, and I learned this many years ago from my dad, Max King, who most followers of the podcast are aware, has written all the original ideas on this for me anyway. And that interpretation would be from the faith of Abraham to the faith of Christ. This is the spiral track, the evolutionary track. It's the way God was being revealed and the righteousness of God was being revealed from the faith of Abraham to the faith of Christ, which basically is from the very first stages of first tier all the way through all first tier stages, and then Jesus as the transformative action of God to bring all humanity into a second tier understanding of our identity. So from faith to faith does start with Abraham. And when we look at Abraham, there are a couple of things that distinguish him from in the faith side of things, which again is his belief that God was the source or power behind his deliverance, behind his journey as a guide, etc. And so the couple of factors come to my mind, Cody, would be, first of all, whereas Adam tried to grasp knowledge and knowing, the first thing that Abraham does is he hears the voice of God telling him to go out to another land. Mm-hmm. And it says that he went out not knowing. Mm-hmm. So I see that as another thing in the two threads of Adam and Abraham. Adam, through selfish source, tries to grasp the knowing, mm-hmm. whereas Abraham went out not knowing, and to go out not knowing requires faith. Any of us that are dealing with situations in our lives that where we don't know the outcome, one of the most difficult things to do is to maintain our faith that all outcomes are going to be found in the realm of spirit. And that is what Abraham's faith pointed to first and foremost.
Oh, man. You're working me over here, Doug.
Good.
So I was thinking about selfish source. So let's play on the two threads. Adam, like I resonate with Adam more than I do Abraham on so many levels, because the tree of knowledge of good and evil, like I want to know. And one of the things that I've found is when you talk about selfish source, you again are talking about something that's still with us, which is, you can call it ego, but the ego loves certainty. The ego wants to know everything. I mean, how many conversations have I had in my own head? How many conversations have I had with you? And then how many conversations as a pastor have people had with me about wanting to know something that's going to happen in the future? As if I have the capability of telling people what's going to happen. Now, that can be eschatology, as it pertains to not just in the narrative, 70 AD, but I mean even beyond that, which is probably why most of that's a best-selling work, is because everyone wants to know. And this is the world that I grew up in. I mean, one of the big things that they talked about is you have to know that you know that you know that you know. And it's like, know about what? And essentially it, was know that you're going to heaven when you die, which again was future oriented. You had to know these things. And that was always what struck me. And actually, I would say struck me, but also derailed me and deterred me from wanting to go further into that particular framework, is because at 12 years old, 13 years old, I kind of had all the answers.
Sure, absolutely.
Which is pretty wild to think about. But people would be like, so what's the afterlife like? And I'm like, well, I could tell you. I could tell you exactly. Well, there are two destinations. There's a heaven and there's a hell. And if you don't have faith, you're going to hell. But if you do, you're going to heaven. And depending on what type of faith you have, if that's good faith or not, you will be rewarded accordingly.
Yes.
And the thing is I just resonate with Adam because I so long to know everything. And even in the minutia of life, like I think about like right now, decisions that are being made in my own personal life, knowing, and I spend so much of my time contemplating and thinking through future scenarios. And you just keep hearing that word, future, future, which is what I think about Abraham.
Yes.
In this thread, that he steps out. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I find real interesting in that story is like Genesis 12, it says, the Lord said to Abraham, go from your country, your people, your father's household to the land I will show you.
Yeah.
Think about that line. Your country, your people, your father's household. Those are all things that Abraham was familiar with, was comfortable with. Those are all things he knew really well. And there's a lot of history, too, around the fact that this single, I guess some would call it monolatry, not necessarily monotheism, but this voice from the divine says go, and he's raised in his father's household, which was a very polytheistic type household. And so this is a giant moment in the narrative. Genesis 12 is massive.
Huge, yeah.
And then when you couple that with these two threads and you differentiate between Adam and Abraham, that's beautiful and powerful. And what's beautiful about it is I resonate with both sides.
That's because we are both sides. What you just said is absolutely true. I am human and I am being. Being meaning I am spirit. This is what differentiates us from the biological species, all others that are on the planet. They operate purely from an instinctual biological form level, and their instinct controls everything that they do because they do not have a consciousness of thinking. They cannot think about thinking. They can't have this discussion. A herd of wildebeest in Africa today is not having this discussion. They're reacting.
The thought that they are, though, would be...
That's a Larson cartoon. But they're only going to react. Is that a lion that comes near? Boom, reaction. Is that food to eat? Reaction, et cetera, et cetera.
Self is source.
Self is source.
Reptilian stem.
Reptilian brain stem. That's our instinct.
Snake in the garden.
Yes.
Good Lord.
Boom. And now the thing about it is, our instinctive self that all the rest of the animal kingdom has is God-given. Our desires to protect ourselves for safety, to have food, and on, with all our instinctive things to protect ourselves, et cetera, those are all God-given instincts. But we're more than just instinctual animals.
So, I'm going to stop you right there. This is why the ego gets such a bad rep. But the reality is again, created in the image of God, including the human of the being.
Yes. Because this is how we experience God. We experience God by having something that challenges us to do otherwise. Because what will happen is that the ego will attempt to overstep its bounds and make all the decisions for us, rather than the voice of spirit being in our consciousness for consideration in the matter. Abraham would have had the same thing happen to him that would have happened to anyone. You go and tell Sarah, we're leaving the family, we're leaving all of our relatives, we're going out somewhere. You know the first question she would have asked is, well, where are we going? And he goes, I don't know. Think about that as a man, right? Think about telling that to your family. So he had to go through that from the egoic standpoint. Look, he wasn't this thing that didn't have feelings. Abraham was just a man, like I am a man, a person, a woman, whatever. And this would have been the first response. And this will be reflective of the cross event, where Jesus' self-preservation instinct was fully alive before his capillaries burst and he sweat, as it were, drops of blood. This is a thread that runs through the whole story, and it's in my life. I have this. It plays a role in function. And that's what we're saying, that plays, but the faith of Abraham pointed to that which is the true identity or true essence of what I am.
Okay. So, oh man, I have 1,000 thoughts. One is, I want to go back a minute to the two threads in Adam and the ego and what you were talking about, the reptilian stem. Do you think that the dualistic category of good and bad, do you think that comes from how the writers in the narrative referred or used a mythological being called the Satan as a representation of this ego? I mean, you think about like cartoons, right?
Sure.
It has like the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other.
Yeah.
Well, in a lot of ways, what that's showing are these two threads.
Yes.
But part of the problem is, part of the dilemma is that you have now a dualistic category of good and bad.
Yes.
And the ego is not fit to be placed in a category like that.
Bingo. And so I become, and this is something that I found a great deal of information on. I will recommend once again Eckhart Tolle and his book, The New Earth. Eckhart Tolle will talk about what is, in my understanding, the mind of Christ, and that is Christ brings to us the power of observation. Each one of us, when we are presented with any circumstance of life, just like Abraham was presented with this circumstance to go out, we can pause, we can call a timeout on the field, and we can be the observer of what's happening inside of me. The one thing that's going to happen inside of me is my natural God-given instinct that at all costs I protect my physical, biological form. That's going to be the number one impulse that protected. Now, if the condition that I'm presented with is that I'm being chased by a lion, then I should be acting on my instincts and I should take off and just get going. But if I'm being presented with a situation whereby it involves my morality, my ethics, the things that I should do as a husband, the way I should treat my wife, the way I should handle circumstances at the house, the way I should do with my children, grandchildren, etc. Now I have the ability, rather than to just operate out of reaction, which many times I have, and I can say that every single time I have suffered the consequences thereof, or I can pause and become the observer of what's happening within my mind. I'm going to be informed from two different places. One place is going to tell me to operate in a self-centered way where I just want to get a pound of flesh, I want revenge, or I want to dominate, or I want my way, or I'm going to be informed by spirit. And as I become more and more conscious of spirit, because I have faith, spirit's not even a question if I don't have faith. But if I have faith, I'm going to consider spirit at that point, and I'm going to say, what is the thing that relates to the nature of what spirit does? Love, brotherly kindness, oneness, wholeness, etc., etc. What would be the best response if I'm operating from faith and spirit?
It's good to be human.
Yes.
But your essence is being.
Yes. And the human is an experience of spirit. In other words, this form life we're in is a way for me as spirit to have this experience of my essence.
I was even thinking about how that plays out, animal reactions.
Yeah.
Of daily emails.
Ooh, yeah.
I mean, think about, I was just thinking about this again, 2 threads. We didn't even scratch the surface of this. We're supposed to be talking about faith, which we are.
I feel like this is an 8 or 10 part series coming on here.
God. Right? Whoa, what do you know? But realistically, okay, here's an example. When I get an email that's a criticism, first of all, I am learning to arrive at a place where I go, this is great, because my critics have honestly become some of my greatest teachers. But beyond that, your critics are also still engaged, which is a good sign. Mm-hmm. It's when they don't send the emails that you begin to realize, they're no longer engaged. Now, that said, I can't tell you how many times I have regretted, and I use that word with quotes around it, but regretted sending, like I'll read it and I'll just start feeling warm and get real angry.
Sure.
And I'll immediately go, just like, and it's a reaction. It's like an animal response.
Absolutely.
And then now kind of a policy I have is 24 hours.
Yeah.
And it's okay. Write it out. Write out what you want to say. Like grieve, get it out. Like the book of Psalm.
Yep.
Say what, you want to ask God to dash their kids' heads against rocks. That's in the Bible.
Yeah, it is.
But you don't hit sin. You wait. And then 9 times out of 10, you wait 24 hours. Instead of reaction, you choose response.
Yes.
And you realize, my God, I'm so glad I did not send that.
Yes.
And they're the 2 threads.
That's it.
In real life, modern day work. The other thing that I was thinking about, Doug, and it just hit me, and we got to talk about this, but if Abraham, people lean into this one, I think I'm onto something. I may not be. It may be awful. If Abraham is the thread that begins faith, and Adam is the thread that is self as source. Think about this for a minute. What does the ego want more than anything? Certainty. Certainty. And what is it that, and this is interesting to me, what is it that the snake in the garden says?
What's the lie?
Did God really say?
Yeah.
Did God really say?
Right.
And actually, what's interesting about that to me is I've had people say to me, like, well, you're like the snake in the garden because God said all these things in the Bible, and you keep reframing it going, did God really say this? Did God really?
You're the snake.
Which, by the way, I love that.
Yeah.
Because they see the snake completely different than I do. So
Sure.
when I look at that, I was like, yep, that's it. And what is it? What is it the snake is doing? The snake, the reptilian stem, the self as source, the ego is saying, I don't know if God said it or not, but I need to know.
Yes.
Certainty.
Yes.
And then you have another thread that's, I'm not certain at all, but by faith I will step out.
Yes.
And that's interesting to me because the religion I grew up in lines more up with the snake in the garden than it does with the thread of Abraham.
And thus you've just summed up why we're doing this podcast series, and we'll continue to do so for ad infinitum. So yes, and I was thinking
about this. Paul Tillich, who's got some great work. Paul Tillich said, the opposite of faith is not doubt, but certainty.
There you go. That's powerful, isn't it?
And isn't that the two threads?
That's it.
One's faith, one's certainty.
Yes. And to me, that's, again, our spiritual DNA, or the DNA of a human from a spiritual perspective, because when you do a look at DNA strands, they're made up of those two strands that wrap around in a spiral, and they go up into these chains. And those are the two threads of our spiritual DNA right there, self as source and spirit as source. And so faith, at the beginning of this faith, this is where we're starting today, we're talking about, and only to those who are interested in the idea that there is actually something beyond us, the human, that there is something called spirit, and that spirit absolutely does exist, and that spirit has revealed itself through this long story and has a lot to say to us about the things that will bring us peace and joy and comfort, even though we're going to hear voices in our head that tell us, no, peace and joy and comfort are only going to come if you do this or do that. And this is where, as we go through faith, Cody, we'll begin with Abraham next week as well, and we'll move toward Jesus. But these two threads are going to come out, and they're going to be at the very heart of what each person listening to this podcast today is struggling with or is finding answers to, depending upon where you are in your life's journey.
Because I would add, we're not against certainty. Again, it's like the ego. We're not against the ego. We're not against certainty, because there are lots of things that that we bring certainty to.
Sure.
Our essence.
Yes.
Who we are in God.
Yeah.
The conversations we're having right now.
Yes.
I mean, to where we are in our trajectory, where we are on our particular own growth, we believe these things are true for us right now.
Yeah.
Now, that said, as we move forward in the next podcast and we talk about these two threads and they keep going, what I'm interested in, and I haven't asked you this before, so I'll do it now, is we'll move from Abraham to Jesus, but is there a move from Adam to someone else? Because do the threads keep running together all the way through the narrative?
Well, here's what's going to be interesting of Jesus. I'm going to do a spoiler alert. Jesus wasn't just spirit only. Jesus was a human being. And so what we'll see is Paul saying,
do they intersect?
Paul is going to say, Jesus is the last Adam.
Oh, good.
You can't be something. You can't be something unless you yourself are that something. You can't be the last of something unless you yourself are that something. You can't be the last Adam unless you are Adam. And Jesus was in every way Adam, the man, Jesus Christ. But he had a consciousness, and that consciousness was of the Father. And he felt that oneness that he was saying was being informed by Spirit. So that is a spoiler alert of where we'll go as we move from faith of Abraham to faith of Christ.
Faith, part 1. Hope you guys have a good week. See you next time.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions or comments, please contact us at info@presence.tv. You can also visit our website at presence.tv or find us on Facebook. We look forward to hearing from you.